Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behavior Evolution Scriptures, and we're going to talk about a breakthrough today. How to get a breakthrough with Yahushua. We're all wanting that, isn't it? To break through, surging forward and having this relationship with Yahushua where no one or nothing around you can affect what you're feeling and experiencing and getting from him. That's the place we want to enter into, isn't it? We all felt really high and amazing when we all got immersed, didn't we? We had that first love experience. I mean, I was writing songs and doing all sorts of things in the Spirit all the time. And then we come into the training, and Yahushua comes closer. And we don't like being flogged and told what to do and chastised and rebuked, do we? We don't like it. So we get serious and miserable. And it's time to have a breakthrough. It's time to come out and be who we're meant to be in Yahushua, and know who you are. You have to know who you are to keep your head up in a day. Trust me. You have to know who you are, what you've been called to do, and who you're called to be. Not even what you're supposed to do, it's who you are. Yeah? So we're going to talk about this breakthrough today. Let's look at your screen. It comes through the story of David and how Abigail. Who's Abigail? Abigail rescues David from himself. So, this is a story about David being saved from himself by a very good and righteous woman named Abigail, who did the 3 rules, and you'll see that. It is interesting and significant how regularly the scripture elevates women, because in typical Eastern Oriental society, women were only a little more valuable than cattle. But Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael, wouldn't tolerate such attitudes amongst his people. He doesn't feel that way about women. Just because the Middle Eastern Oriental society in this era felt like that, still does a bit today too. That's not how Yahushua feels. Samuel has just died, and with his passing, all hope for peace between David and Saul has gone with him. Because Samuel bridged the divide of loyalties among the various tribal coalitions. He kept the peace. There was no other man since Joshua's death who held the respect of all 12 tribes and whose authority was honored by all Yisrael. Even Saul feared him. So there's been no one since Moses and Joshua who held all 12 tribes, had their respect and their honor. So we're going into Samuel chapter 25 today. So Samuel died, and people from all over Yisrael gathered to mourn for him when he was buried at his home in Ramah. Family tombs were often underneath the house or in the courtyard of the home. Meanwhile, David moved his camp to the Paran desert, for En-Gedi was too easily within reach of King Saul. And there was a rough, mean man from the clan of Caleb named Nabal, which means wilt and folly. Foolish man, that's what Nabal means. He was very rich, lived in Maon, and owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, which he kept at Carmel. And he had a wife named Abigail, which means my father is strength. And she was a righteous, sensible, and an extremely beautiful woman. And based on their names, possibly given at a later date, because why would you call your son Nabal if it means foolish? Anyway, these names possibly given at a later date, based on their names and their characters, we see that Nabal and Abigail are polar opposites. Yeah? One day, Nabal was in Carmel, having his servants cut the wool from his sheep, and David was in the desert when he heard about it. So he sent 10 men to Carmel with this message for Nabal. I hope that you and your family are healthy and that all's going well for you. I've heard that you are cutting the wool from your sheep. When your shepherds were with us in Carmel, we didn't harm them, and nothing was ever stolen from them. Just ask your shepherds and they'll back up what I'm saying as truth. My servants are your servants, and you are like a father to me. This time of sheep shearing is a celebration, as well as this time of sheep shearing is for celebrating as well as working. So please be kind and share some of your food with us. This was all just about getting food, buttering him up just so he can have some food. This festival is the shepherd's equivalent of the harvest. Shepherd's equivalent of the harvest and threshing season. And it was a festive season, a good day. This wasn't a Moedim feast day, one of the 7 scriptural festivals, but it was a day of great joy and partying and drinking wine that celebrated the harvest of wool. And David's 10 men were essentially unwelcome party crashers. And contained within David's message is a request for supplies as a gift for David and his small community. Like the mafia going in and saying, you give me some of your stuff and I'll offer you protection. We're going to skim your till. Yeah? So the mafia also. Nabal was being strong-armed. Despite all the courteous sounding flattery, David buttering him up and wishing his family well and everything, he just wanted some food. He was being strong-armed and he knew it, and he didn't like it. He was a powerful man of an influential clan and refused to be treated in such a manner. And David's men went to Nabal. David's men went to Nabal and gave him his message, then waited for Nabal's answer. Who the hell does this David think he is? That blasted son of Jesse is just one more slave on the run from his master. And there are way too many of them these days. Way too many of them these days. What makes you boys think I would take my bread, my water, and the meat that I've had cooked for my own shearers and give it to you? Besides, how do I even know that David sent you? So, the men returned to their camp and told David everything Nabal had said. That's it. Everyone get your swords now, David ordered. So they all strapped on their swords and 200 men stayed behind to guard the camp, but the other 400 followed David. Remember, he had about 600 men? 200 stayed behind to guard the camp, 400 strapped on their swords, and they went out gung-ho. So, there's about to be a big war happening over these 2 men. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's servants told Abigail, this is Nabal's wife. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's servants told Abigail, David's men were often nearby while we were taking care of the sheep in the fields. They were very good to us. They never hurt us, and nothing was ever stolen from us while they were nearby. With them around day and night, we were as safe as we would have been inside a walled city. Dave just sent some messengers from the desert to wish our master well, but he shouted insults at them. He's a brutish son of a bitch who won't listen to anyone. And in the original Hebrew, it actually says son of Belial, which is one of the greatest insults you could hurl back in these days. Son of Belial, son of Belial. Anyway, he's a brutish son of a bitch. He won't listen to anyone. Isn't there something you can do? Please think of something. Or else our master and his family and everyone who works for him are all doomed. David's on the warpath now. You've offended him. David is a complex man, which is a nice way of saying that as upright and Yahuwah-fearing and determined to be obedient as he is, he can also be proud, self-promoting, and tends to overreact, and at times let his volcanic anger and passions overwhelm even his best intentions. And this is one of those times. So, kind of setting the scene here for the main point, the main thing that's going to come out of this lesson. Let's talk about David a bit more. So now we see David being consumed by blind rage, the result of taking Nabal's insult personally. basically called David a slave. You're the king's slave. You've run away from home. Go back to daddy, mate. You think you're going to be the king? You know. So I'm not giving you any of my food. Who do you think you are? Even though David and his men were protecting this guy's sheep and his people. So David's flying off the handles now. He's taking it personally. We see David being consumed by blind rage, the result of taking Nabal's insult personally, and he's about to commit blood guilt. A terrible thing that could easily have destroyed his reputation and his witness. It's interesting. I didn't realise that word was there. Reputation. Our next video is about reputation. I've been looking into that. We might tie them together. A terrible thing. Blood guilt is a terrible thing that could easily have destroyed his reputation and his witness. But even more, it probably would have disqualified him from being Yahuwah's anointed king, which would have altered history. The truth is that Nabal had committed no violation of Torah law, unless we counted it as not loving his neighbour as himself. Nothing more had happened than David figured he was owed something, and Nabal disagreed. All that had come between David and Nabal were words. No harm was done, no property stolen. But for this, David was ready in his violent anger to commit murder. It is so ironic that this story would appear immediately after we find David with a seemingly justifiable, if not compelling reason to kill a man, Saul, while he was on the toilet. Our last episode. Because this man was intent on killing David. If ever there was a case for self-defense, that would have been it. Killing Saul while he's using the crapper would have been no one would have held it against you for that after what Saul's been doing to him. But in paying attention to the spirit of Yahuwah and refusing to take the advice of his men, David spared the life of King Saul. But here, though, David was in an out-of-control rage and ready to kill anyone in his path for no other reason than a man had insulted him. He's got his little tutu on, doing a little ballerina dance. So now we're going to see how the all-merciful Yahuwah stopped this atrocity. Not so much for the sake of those who might die, but for David's sake and the sake of his redemptive plan. Yahuwah steps in and intervenes. How does he do it? Let's find out. So David's just told his men, strap on your swords. We're going to show this. We're going to show him a lesson. Yeah? David was on the warpath. Nabal had signed his own death warrant, and his wife knew it. But Abigail didn't want to see lots of innocent people die over some food and some heated words. So, being wise and virtuous, she set out to stop it, quickly grabbing 200 loaves of bread, 2 large clay jars of wine, the meat from 5 sheep, a large sack of roasted grain, 100 handfuls of raisins, and 200 handfuls of dried figs. She loaded all the food on donkeys and told her servants, "Take this on ahead, and I'll catch up with you." Now, we read straight past that, but that'd be a fair few hours of work if you ask me to get all those things together. Wouldn't it? It's no small task. That's a lot of food. So she's put it all on the donkeys and told her servants, "Take this on ahead and I'll catch up with you." And she didn't tell her husband Nabal what she was doing. And just as Abigail was riding her donkey on the path that led around the hillside, suddenly, at Yahuwah's hand, suddenly she met David and his men heading straight at her. David had just been saying, "How stupid was I, wasting my bloody time guarding Nabal's things in the desert and keeping them from being stolen. I was good to him, damn it, and now he pays me back with insults. I swear that by morning there won't be anyone alive from his family or his servants who piss against the wall," males, "and let Elohim punish me if I don't do it." Now, the interesting thing that I found, my translation's a bit crude in certain areas, but this is actually in the King James, the good old King James version. And I want to prove it to you because I thought it was hilarious. Look, this is the original. See, I've used the word piss there. How could you possibly put the word piss in the scriptures? Look at this old King James here. The same scripture, it says, so, and this is David having a rant, so and more also do Yahuwah unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by morning light, any that pisseth against the wall. In other words, I'm not going to try and put it in other words. It's talking about pissing against the wall, yeah? If you look up this letter here, this number, if you look up this number here, it's urination, doing a wee-wee all the way home. So, what about that? The scripture actually has that word in the original, pisseth. And he's saying it, it's just his poetic way of saying males. It's crude, rude, and undue way of saying males. I swear that by morning, this is what this scripture means, without all the Yoda Shakespeare. I swear that by morning there won't be anyone alive from his family or his servants who piss against the wall. Males. And let Elohim punish me if I don't do it. I thought you'd get a bit of a kick out of that because I didn't know that. In the original, it says pisseth. Imagine saying that in your Sunday morning church. Oh, how indignant would they be? Yes, this is the real text. The scripture doesn't mince words. And the reality is that so much of what we read today in our English translations has been watered down and made considerably more genteel. And often less memorable and impactful than what the words actually say. David's thoughts are being accurately recorded for us, and they are not admirable. This predecessor to Messiah, David, is a strange mixture of passive shepherd and ferocious warrior. A mix that seems utterly incompatible, almost schizophrenic. David is essentially muttering to himself as he's travelling, complaining about how he and his men have been insulted and cheated, and he's boiling this all over in his mind, replaying his anger again and again. I can relate. I've been in those moods. I've been in those times of muttering and in yourself, talking. That they call me David Hellscott. They're muttering and talking to yourself and complaining. This is what David's doing right now. He's taking it completely personal, and he's going after this guy. You know, I swear, anybody who piss against the wall, I'm going to kill him. So, how's Abigail going to solve this problem? We'll go into this later on, but remember, she's a woman too, so she's got no right or power in this era. How is she going to fix this conflict between these two men? So, David's ranting off his face, and Abigail, a rich aristocrat, quickly got off her donkey and bowed down in front of David. And even though she was the attractive and intelligent wife of a wealthy and powerful man, her station in life was little importance to her at the moment. But her desperate hope was to stop an atrocity before it happened, to save her family and her clan, even if it meant personal humiliation and accepting all blame. She was taking a great risk as a woman and said, "Sir, please let me explain. Don't pay any attention to my good-for-nothing husband, for Nabal is his name and folly is his game." Literally, his name means folly. Nabal is his name, folly is his game. And I didn't see the men you sent, but please take this gift of food for you and your men. Yahuwah has kept you from taking revenge and from killing innocent people. So I hope your enemies and anyone else who wants to harm you will end up just like Nabal. I swear this by the living Yahuwah and by your life. Please forgive me if I talk too much. Interesting thing to tack on the end. Please forgive me if I talk too much. Why would she say that? What's she asking forgiveness for? Abigail is not asking forgiveness for her husband's behavior, but for herself. For if we put ourselves, let's go back in our time machine, if we put ourselves into the Middle Eastern mindset, we see that we have a woman speaking to a man who isn't her husband. A man who is well known and to a degree feared. This is the mighty giant slayer. She has dared to approach the man, even to seek him out, when custom is that a man must approach a woman, if there is to be any conversation. She is boldly intervening in her husband's affairs, and it could easily have been David's decision to treat her very badly for daring to stand between two men in a conflict. In fact, she is coming dangerously close to, if not stepping over the line of, an obscure Torah law that we looked into a very long time ago. Another little pattern here. What was it? Back in Deuteronomy. If two men are fighting and the wife of one man tries to rescue her husband by grabbing the other man's nutsack, you must cut off her hand. No mercy. No questions asked. She's stepping in and making it an unfair fight. This is none of your business. This is between the two men. Yeah? And that's in the Torah. So, she's dangerously stepping into that area where she's interfering. Now, obviously, Abigail is not physically tussling with David. However, the underlying principle of Deuteronomy 25 stands. A woman is not to intervene in an otherwise fair fight between her husband and another man. This could have taken a number of different courses for Abigail, most of them bad. That's why we see her pleading with David to be forgiving towards her for intervening in this matter. So she continues. What's she been saying? She was saying, hope none of your enemies do this. I swear by living Yahuwah, by your life. Please forgive me if I talk too much. Yahuwah will always protect you and your family because you fight for him. I hope that you won't ever do anything evil as long as you live. Then Yahuwah your Elohim will keep your spirit safe in the bundle of the living when your enemies try to kill you. What on earth does that mean? And this is the English, but the Hebrew says pretty much the same thing. Yahuwah your Elohim will keep your spirit safe in the bundle of the living when your enemies try to kill you. But he will snatch away their lives quicker than you can throw a rock from a sling. Yahuwah has promised to do many good things for you, even to make you the ruler of Yisrael. Yahuwah will keep his promises to you, and now your conscience will be clear. Remember the blood guilt he was about to enter into? His conscience will be clear now because of her stopping him. Because you won't be guilty of taking revenge and killing innocent people. When Yahuwah does all those good things for you, please remember me. So she's really pacifying the situation and reasoning with David. And this statement here, we're going to look at that for a minute. Yahuwah your Elohim will keep your spirit safe. Why? Let's go back a bit. I hope you won't do anything evil as long as you live, because then Yahuwah your Elohim will keep your spirit safe in the bundle of the living when your enemies try to kill you. Let's look at that for a minute. It's fascinating. Abigail is saying that David's life will be bound up in this bundle of life, bundle of the living. And here the word referring to David's life is the word nephesh. Normally it's a different word, but in this case it's nephesh, which doesn't just mean life, but rather life essence. So the Hebrew word used for this bundle of life, the life, isn't your physical life, it's life essence, your spirit. So David's life essence will be bound up in this bundle of life. But bundle of life is actually an ancient Hebrew expression. So what did it mean to people of that day to be bound into the bundle of life? The Hebrew expression is bitzor hahaim, and it is indeed speaking of some kind of bundle and of life. But the bundle is referring not to a bag or to a package, but rather to a document. A document of life. In the days of David, a document for the Hebrews was usually a scroll, or even better, an animal skin with words written on, and then rolled up and tied with a leather string to form a bundle. Thus, a better and more apt translation is document of life, or document of the living. David's name will be in the document of the living, if he does no evil. So, the bundle of life is some kind of divine document, where those whom Yahuwah chooses have their names placed into it. and so their life essences, their spirits, are tucked safely away forever. Sound familiar? Obviously, this is fantastic because I love finding the origins of patterns or word games, not games, but things that we only thought were in the later books, New Testament, are actually way back here. Obviously, sound familiar? Obviously, this is a very early way of the early text speaking of the Lamb's Book of Life. Yeah? In case you hadn't cottoned on to that. In Revelation 20, and I saw the dead, both great and small, standing in front of the throne. Books were opened, and another book, or scroll, the Book of Life. And the dead were judged from what was written in the books according to what they had done. According to what they had done. The dead were written in the Book of Life according to what? According to what they had done. How they'd behaved while in their flesh. This matches exactly what Abigail is telling David. That by his action of forgiving the insult, stopping the judging, changing his mind, stop taking Nabal's behaviour personally and let him have it. Let him have it. Vengeance is mine, says Yahuwah, remember? Let him have it. Stop excusing your childish behaviour, your childish retaliation, in other words, murder and blood guilt. If he does all that, if he stops taking Nabal's behaviour personally and lets him have it, stop excusing his own childish retaliation, murder and blood guilt, then he would be written into the book of life. That's what Abigail is saying. That's what's recorded here. If you do no evil, if your behaviour is not evil, if you don't have blood guilt, if you don't have all these crimes against you, then your name will be written in the bundle of the living, in the scroll, in the book of life. So as we have discovered, the many principles, such as eternal life in the book of life, that we find in the latter texts, Gospels and Epistles, are but progressive developments of principles already established, even if only vaguely, in the early writings of Moses and the prophets. And Abigail is definitely speaking prophetically here and doing the three rules. Interesting. I mean, you couldn't talk about something. Abigail couldn't talk about something that's brought up in Revelation unless she was speaking by the Spirit of Yahuwah. And as we can see from what she's actually doing as a woman with no rights and could very much get herself abused or killed, she's stepping out and trusting Yahuwah to stop a catastrophe from happening, which even David is just willing to go ahead and slaughter people for. So she's doing the three rules. The three rules produce a behaviour that will grant us access into deliverance. For while Yahusha's blood can only legally start that process, open the door, open the portal, our activation of the seed he's planted in us, down payment of the Ruach, that is the maturity. That is the transformation and the clothed in the steam, or the oil, that will be required upon entry to the wedding feast. And without this daily experience behaving Torah, we will be found naked, unprepared, and unwise. Many have said that the oil that the wise virgins had was the Torah. Well, that's great. You've got the written Torah, great. Even the Jews can say that. I'm talking about the experience of activating that relationship, having the relationship, going into that portal and using the Torah behavior, which is beautifully summed up in the three rules, doing that to prepare yourself. Yeah? I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So the three rules produce a behavior that will grant us access into deliverance. For while Yahusha's blood starts off the process, our activation of the seed he's planted in us is the maturity, the transformation and the clothed in esteem, the oil that will be required upon entry to the wedding feast. And without this daily experience behaving Torah, we will be found naked, unprepared, and unwise. So Abigail just put her whole life on the line here to try and pacify this warrior. Unfortunately, David told her, I praise Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael. He must have sent you to meet. He must have sent you meet me today. And you should also be praised. So even though he's gone off the rails and he's been a bit savage, this is why you just watch what he says and you look at his behavior, how quickly he turns, and then you can see why Yahushua loves this man so much. Man after his own heart. He's just been caught in his tracks, pacified and spoken to by a woman, and he says, I praise Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael. He must have sent you to me today. And you should also be praised. Your good sense kept me from taking revenge and killing innocent people. If you hadn't come to meet me so quickly, every man and boy in Nabal's family and in his servants' families would have been killed by morning. Anyone who pisses on the wall. I swear by the living Yahuwah, Elohim of Yisrael, who protected you, that this is the truth. Fair dinkum, mate. I was about to do it. So David, responding to Abigail in what can only be described as a startling act of humility for a Middle Eastern man towards a woman, he agreed that Abigail is entirely correct and he was dead wrong, and he forgave her bold intervention, giving her compliments and blessings, and admits that she is a follower of Yahuwah. And had she not broken through and been obedient to Yahuwah, instead of allowing her fears to take over and shrink from her divine assignment, not only would her family be gone, but David would have become stooped in blood guilt. David recognizes that as much as she saved her family, she has saved him too. Get this. This is a characteristic of David that pleases Yahuwah. When he's done wrong, or is contemplating wrong, and is confronted with it, he is humble and admits his guilt before Yahuwah. He acknowledges that even above those he has harmed, it is Yahuwah who he has really sinned against. A humble heart is the key to true repentance. No matter what's going through his mind, no matter what he's about to do, no matter what he has done, afterwards he repented. It reminds me of the parable of the son who said he'd go and do it, but didn't. But afterwards he repented. That's the key to all this. This is the heart that Yahuwah is after. Man after Yahuwah's own heart is David. So we're getting a bit of a looking into this man and saying, what is it about him that Yahuwah loves so much? Well, this is it. He repents all the time. He can be told when he's wrong. What's wrong is wrong. That's the characteristic. The soft heart. Even when this woman's approaching him and telling him straight almost, he goes, oh, Yahuwah must have sent you to meet me today. He's searching. He's got his eye on the spiritual. He's looking for Yahuwah in all the situations, like we should be in our day. Yeah? Anyway, let's move on. So, David accepted the food Abigail had brought. Don't worry, dear, he said. You can go home now, and I'll do what you've asked. And Abigail went back home and found Nabal throwing a huge party fit for a king. This was the harvest sheep shearing festival, remember? Great joy. He's just thrown a party fit for a king. He was off his face, drunk as a skunk, feeling very good. So she didn't tell him anything that night. But when he sobered up the next morning, Abigail told him everything that had happened between her and David. And Nabal had a heart attack and fell back in his bed as still as a stone. Then 10 days later, Yahuwah took his life. In a bit of a coma for 10 days, and then Yahuwah snuffed him out. And when David heard that Nabal had died, he said, oh, praise Yahuwah. He's judged Nabal guilty for insulting me. Yahuwah kept me from doing something terribly wrong and made sure that Nabal only hurt himself with his own evil behavior. So what could have come on David as blood guilt and made him ineligible to be the next king, Yahuwah stepped in. Vengeance is mine, he says. You can't touch my anointed Nagid, prince in waiting. You can't touch my anointed bride. You can't touch my people. Vengeance is mine. But David was gung-ho to go and avenge himself, make himself guilty, through his own rage, his own behaviour, taking things personal, not letting the idiot have it, And then he's going off to kill people and excusing it, making excuses. So, what do we see? Yahuwah does fight for his own. He's just snuffed this guy out because he insulted David. And David, through listening to the counsel of this woman, Abigail, was obedient. And Yahuwah fought for them because they were obedient. And Nabal's widow Abigail was still at Carmel, so David sent messengers to ask her if she would marry him. He's really taken by her words. And she bowed down and said, I would willingly be David's slave and wash his servants' feet. That's great love. I didn't ask you to be my slave. I asked you to be my wife. She says, I would willingly be David's slave and wash his servants' feet. These words, remember this, she's talking prophetically when we look back. These words by Abigail are profound, especially when we incorporate the concept that David is a type and shadow of Messiah. Remember when we saw Saul, he's the anti-king, the anti-Messiah. David is a shadow, a type, illustration, pattern, if you will, characteristics of Messiah. So note that Abigail speaks not of her washing David's feet, but rather the feet of David's followers, David's servants. And since she has accepted David's offer of marriage in front of witnesses, she is now legally betrothed. She is David's wife, the master's wife, with only the act of consummation left to finalize the marriage. And yet she speaks of herself as a servant who wants to wash the feet of her husband's servants. Does this have a familiar ring to it? What words of prophecy is this? David was a wise man to immediately go after such a woman after she became a widow at Yahuwah's hand. Very wise man to go after a woman with such prophetic tapping in and breaking through and hearing Yahuwah's voice. Yeah? Obviously the similarity here is Messiah Yahusha bowing down and washing his servants' feet. Yeah, that's the parallel we're pulling here, if it wasn't obvious. David is a type of Messiah, and she's going to come along and wash his servants' feet. So Abigail quickly got ready and went back with David's messengers. She rode on her donkey, while 5 of her servant women walked alongside. And she and David were married as soon as she arrived. David had earlier married Ahinoam from the town of Jezreel, so both she and Abigail were now David's wives. Meanwhile, in his bitterness, Saul had arranged for Michal, David's first wife, to marry Palti, the son of Laish, who came from the town of Galim. What a great insult to his honour and manhood, giving David's wife to someone else. So there's no reconciliation going to happen between these two men. He's just gone and given his wife, his first wife, love of his life, to someone else. Saul's done that. So, isn't this amazing when you look at it, when you really dissect it and see what behaviours, it's all about the behaviour, what this woman had to go through to break through, just the cultural stuff, just the fact that she had no right. She could have been stoned, she could have been killed for stepping in between these men's quarrel, And then, of course, David breaking through and receiving it. Let's talk about this breakthrough. Connecting through Yahusha's portal. How to have a breakthrough. In the English, breakthrough just means make or force a way through a barrier. Force your way through a barrier. Appear for the sun or the moon, appearing from behind the clouds. Achieve success in a particular area. Breakthrough in the Hebrew, to cleave, to rend, break, rip, or open, make a breach, break forth. I'll mention this now before I forget too. The reason this came up in one of our conversations the other night, after one of the videos we'd done with Christopher and Victoria, was Christopher said to Victoria, why don't you look up what breakthrough means? And I said, that's 2 words. You can't look up 2 words in the Hebrew. It's not good. You won't get any. You got to. And he said, just look it up anyway, because he knew you could. He tried it. And look, typed in breakthrough, And it blew me away. I thought, oh, didn't know you could do that. Thought you had to put one word in at a time. It's a word search. No, because the Hebrew often puts words together as an expression or state. So that's where this came from. And I said, does anybody want to look this up? If not, I'll run with it. Now I have. So what does breakthrough mean in the Hebrew? To cleave, rend, break, rip open, make a breach, break forth into pieces through. Be ready to burst, cleave asunder, cut up, divide, hatch, rent asunder, rip up, tear, win, to pull down or into pieces, to break or destroy, beat down, break down through, destroy, overthrow, pluck down. It's very, very warfare battle words, isn't it? Pluck down, pull down, ruin, throw down utterly, to slice, break open or to pierce, bring forth, cleave, cut, shred, strike through, to break through, spread or separate yourself, disperse, divide, be out of joint, part, scatter abroad, separate, sever yourself, stretch asunder, expansion, to break away from just authority, break away. We've all broken away from things, haven't we? Trespass, we've been separated from things. Apostatize, quarrel, offend, rebel, revolt. Revolt, we're in a revolt. We're in a behavior revolt, behavior revolution, transgression. So there's a few scriptures here that relate to this. This is from the Hebrew lexicon. When you click on these numbers here, certain things come up. And Yahuwah said to Moses, go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto me to gaze, and many of them perish. So he didn't want any of the people to break through the barrier from the Levites. Don't break through the barrier, otherwise this is earlier than the Levites. Yeah, this is earlier than that. Just don't come up the mountain. Don't break through up onto the mountain, and otherwise my power will come onto them. So it's talking about power. And then in Exodus 19, Yahuwah said to him, away, get down, and you shall come up, you and Aaron with you, but let not the priests and the people break through. Don't let the priests and the people break through to come up unto me. Otherwise I'll break forth onto them. Yeah, the power will frackle them up. This is where all our understanding of the portal came from, when that interdimensional portal came through. It started on the mountain and then it went on to the tabernacle, yeah? Don't let anybody come too close, they'll be frackled up. And in Matthew, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon the earth. Don't lay up for yourself treasures on the earth, where moth and rust corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in the Shamaim, heaven, interdimensional, higher, divine, invisible, incorruptible treasures. Lay up treasures there, where neither moth nor rust do corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. No one can steal. They can even kill your flesh, but they can't steal your immortality. They can't steal the incorruptible seed, the portal connection you have within you. Breakthrough implies an unleashing of power, which can either bless the righteous or curse and destroy the unclean. It is connecting to Yahushua's invisible realm. But he has a few requirements first. So it's all about the unleashing of power. Moses and Aaron could come up the mountain. Don't let any of those other ratbags come up, otherwise my power will be unleashed. If they break through, my power will be unleashed and frackle them up, because they're unclean. Let's tie this up with the story of David and Abigail in our lives today. Let's have a look. Yahushua is very practical. And often uses the humblest of people, like Abigail, to break through and achieve his purposes. In this case, stopping a mass war, blood guilt, and the moral pollution of his chosen King David, who had thrown aside his identity and royal status in the master just to be pissy and offended at a big bullhead with no idea how to behave. How often do we do that? Throw aside our identity and our royal status in the master just to be huffy-puffy and pissy-wissy. at someone who's generally just a big bullhead, don't know how to behave. Because if they did, they would. David took the situation with Nabal so personally, and it wounded him, stripping him of sanity. Remember? He's off his face, murmuring and grumbling and muttering to himself. Mad. So because he took Nabal personally, it wounded him, stripping him of sanity. We're looking at invisible and visible here. This is invisible esteem, covering, protection here. He took it personally and he was wounded, went mad. Stripped him of sanity, clarity of thought, and wisdom of direction. Then, instead of remembering who he is and letting it go, letting him have it, because if you knew, if you walked around thinking and knowing that he was going to be the king, you wouldn't care about this, would you? He lost sight of it all because he took it personally, wounded. Instead of remembering who he is and letting it go, letting him have it, he was ranting and raving about Nabal, ready to rip him to shreds and everyone he knew too. And he had no problem rationally excusing such behaviour, even though he was the future Nagid, prince in waiting. Satan and his minions operate in the invisible realm of emotions, stripping us of our divine garments of esteem by getting us all fired up and pissy. So we can't enter boldly because we're too emotional, too upset. Can't enter boldly through our portals and connect with Yahusha. See how clever he is? That's the barrier he puts up. Emotions, dramas, conflicts in our day. He sends people, wives, husbands, family, friends, children, everybody sends people to us daily who are too bullheadish to know that they're just being used to get you. It's not even about them. They're already got. He's coming to get you. Because he wants you to forget who you are and take them personally, instead of knowing that you are royalty. So, you are a Nagid, a prince, princess in waiting, for the king to arrive. We are royalty, learning how to behave royalty. See how clever Satan is? Stopping us from breaking through. Because if we do these things, and it's all emotional, it's all in the emotions, it's all invisible. If we do these things, we're cutting ourselves off from Yahusha. We don't, not that he's cut himself off from us, we've cut ourselves off because we're too emotional. We don't even go there. We cut ourselves off. So stupid because we fall for it every time. See how Abigail had a breakthrough and saved the day by doing the 3 rules? She was practical. She heard Yahuwah's voice and obediently followed. She didn't allow her lower status as a woman in society of that era, not in Yahuwah's mind, but in society at that time, she was of a lower status. She didn't allow that to dissuade her. She didn't take her husband's behavior personally or make excuses for him. She acted quickly, and by bowing down humbly before David and letting him have it, she managed to avert a national crisis. We will have no true breakthrough or victory without practicing the 3 rules. Won't happen. Because in them we learn the fruit of the Spirit, making us blameless before any laws. Mankind's laws, Torah instructional laws. You are blameless because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. If you are behaving these 9 fruits, of which we are flogged and rebuked and chastised and disciplined to bring forth these peaceable fruits of spiritual righteousness, if we are doing those, but to say to somebody, have joy, have love, just calm down, just be patient, well, you could say, why aren't you patient? Why aren't you feeling love? Why aren't you feeling joy? And you ask yourself these questions. Why aren't I feeling love, joy, peace, patience? Why aren't I feeling those things? What have I done? What have I said? What have I thought? What have I taken personally? Have I taken something Yahusha is saying to me or doing to me, chastising me? Am I despising the discipline? Or is it something someone said to me and I've taken it personal? Not letting them have what they said. Not putting myself off and understanding them. Because everyone just wants to be understood. The minute you stand on someone's side and understand them, they shut up. They're happy. Making excuses for yourself. So, see where this is going? Abigail essentially did the 3 rules. Averted a national crisis. And then David stepped in, and he's a perfect example in this story of how not to do the rules. He didn't do them. He took everything personal. He's about to commit murder, blood guilt. See where it can take us? Wars begin just by words. Greater is the man that can control himself than the man that can control major cities. You know? Anyway, that's enough. I think I've made the point. There's a question here. So dealing with the scroll of life. Remember we talked about the scroll of life? Abigail says to David, if you don't do these evil behaviors, if you don't bring on yourself all these crimes and blood guilt and what have you, you will be written, essentially that's what she's saying, you'll be written in the scroll of life. So my question to you is, if you don't make the wedding feast by perfecting through the 3 rules, because the 3 rules bring forth the fruit of righteousness, your garment of praise, your preparation, your Torah behavior, your experience, your behavior in the, all that, the oil for the wise virgins, all that. So if you don't make the wedding feast because you haven't perfected through the 3 rules, are you even written in the book of life? Mic drop.